When we talk about overcoming negative feelings, the first and most important step is understanding where they come from. Not in a vague, surface-level way, but in a deep biological sense. Most people try to fight their negative emotions with distraction or denial. They tell themselves to stay positive, or they bury the feeling entirely, hoping it will go away. But that's like ignoring a warning light on your car's dashboard. The signal doesn't vanish, it gets louder. More chaotic, more disruptive. If you want to rise above negative emotions, you need to know how they work inside the body and the brain. So let's look at what's happening when you feel anxious, sad, angry, or defeated. These aren't just moods. They are neurochemical and physiological states generated by systems in the brain that are trying to do something very specific: protect you. Your nervous system is designed to sense danger and respond fast. The amygdala, a small, deeply embedded part of the brain, plays a central role in this process. It scans for threat, not just physical threats like a wild animal or a speeding car, but social, emotional, and psychological threats to rejection, uncertainty, failure, judgment. And when it detects something that feels unsafe, it sends signals throughout your body that change everything: how you breathe, how you focus, how your heart beats. This is why, when you're in a negative emotional state, your whole system changes, your vision narrows. Your thoughts speed up or spiral, your ability to think clearly drops. That's not weakness, that's biology. Your body is prioritizing survival, not deep reflection. But here's the problem: in our modern world, most of what triggers these responses isn't life-threatening. It's a text message, it's a comment online, it's a memory, and yet your nervous system doesn't know the difference. It reacts the same way, which means you can end up stuck in a loop, feeling overwhelmed, reactive, and powerless. Now, the good news: this system is trainable. The amygdala is not the only player in this game. You also have the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for regulating emotion, decision making, and assessing long-term consequences. This region allows you to pause, analyze, and choose how to respond instead of just reacting. But it only comes online when you create the space for it. You can't think clearly if you're flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. So one of the most powerful things you can do is recognize your state and learn how to shift it. Awareness is the first tool. When you can pause and say, "I'm feeling anxious," or "there's a lot of frustration in me right now," you're doing something powerful. You're shifting brain activity away from the reactive centers and into the parts that regulate and process. That moment of labeling a feeling, of simply noticing it, creates a gap between stimulus and response. And that gap is where your power lies. The research shows that even this small act, recognizing and naming what you're feeling, leads to real, measurable changes in the brain. Your prefrontal cortex becomes more active, and your stress response begins to calm down. That's not philosophy. That's neuroscience. Once you understand that negative emotions are patterns, neural patterns, chemical cascades, physical signals, you realize they are not permanent. They are not truths, they are not you. They are experiences your system is generating in response to something. And if they are experiences, then they can be moved through, processed, and eventually replaced, but not through force, not through suppression, through understanding. See, most people try to fix how they feel without listening to it first. They want the emotion to leave without learning the lesson it brought. But every emotional state, especially the negative ones, is trying to tell you something. Maybe you're out of alignment. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you haven't been honest with yourself. If you constantly avoid or ignore that, the signals will get louder. And your brain, which is always wiring based on repetition, will start to believe that this overwhelmed, chaotic state is your normal baseline. That becomes your default, but you can rewire that. You can train your nervous system to return to calm, to regulate, to refocus. It starts with recognizing that you are not at war with your emotions. You are in conversation with them. When you understand the biology, when you know that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, even when it's uncomfortable, you stop panicking. You stop over-identifying, and that gives you space to grow. That's how you begin to overcome negative feelings, not by fighting them blindly, but by understanding the system behind them. Once you learn the mechanism, you take the mystery out of it, and once it's no longer mysterious, it becomes manageable. One of the most overlooked tools you have for transforming your emotional state, especially when you're in the middle of a negative spiral, is your attention. Most people think of attention as something passive. You're either focused or distracted. But in reality, attention is an incredibly powerful, trainable force that shapes not only how you experience the world, but how your brain and nervous system develop over time. Where your attention goes, your energy, your physiology, and your entire emotional landscape follow. When you're dealing with negative feelings, your attention tends to get hijacked. Think about it. If you're anxious, your attention is probably stuck in the future, imagining worst case scenarios, mentally rehearsing things that haven't even happened. If you're feeling regret or sadness, your attention is likely locked onto the past, rehashing old conversations, reliving painful moments. In both cases, you're not in the present. And when you're not in the present, you're not in control. Attention is a limited neural resource. That means you only get so much of it at any given time. And just like money, time, or energy, how you spend it matters. If you spend your attention on social comparison, drama, or obsessive overthinking, your brain starts to reinforce those patterns. The networks involved in fear, rumination, and self-criticism become stronger. Your nervous system learns that this is what matters. It devotes more resources to scanning for threats, remembering past failures, or anticipating judgment. Not because you want it to, but because that's what you keep feeding it. That's the cost of untrained attention. But you can flip this entirely. You can take that same attention and redirect it inward, toward growth, learning, and self-regulation. When you choose to focus on your breath, your body, your immediate surroundings, even for just a few minutes, you are anchoring yourself in the only place where change actually happens, the present moment. This is not a cliche. This is a neurological truth. Your brain cannot rewire from the past, and it cannot rewire in the imagined future. It rewires now. So how do you begin to take control of your attention? First, you recognize that you have that control. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of those thoughts. When you focus on something intentionally, whether it's your breath, a task, or even the feeling in your body, you are shifting the activity in your brain from the default mode network, which is involved in mind, wandering, and rumination, to task, positive networks that promote clarity, engagement, and emotional regulation. In simpler terms, you stop spiraling and start stabilizing. The second thing you do is reduce distraction. We live in an environment that is constantly trying to steal your attention: notifications, noise, social media, headlines. Every one of these things is pulling you out of your own life and into someone else's agenda. And the more often you let your attention get pulled, the harder it becomes to hold it still. You train your brain to be reactive instead of responsive. That reactivity feeds anxiety. It feeds stress. It feeds insecurity. And so silence becomes essential, not just the absence of noise, but the discipline of not constantly broadcasting, not explaining yourself, not responding to every external pressure. When you stay silent, you preserve your energy. You give your attention room to breathe. Now here's where this becomes a game changer. When you consistently focus your attention on your internal state, your breath, your emotions, your posture, your inner dialogue, you develop what's known as interoceptive awareness. That's your ability to sense and understand what's happening inside you, moment to moment, and this skill is directly linked to emotional resilience. People who have strong interoceptive awareness are better at identifying their feelings, regulating stress, and bouncing back from setbacks. Because they're not overwhelmed by emotion, they're in relationship with it. You're not going to build this ability overnight. It's a practice, but every time you redirect your attention away from the noise and toward yourself, you strengthen that muscle. You teach your brain that you are the priority, not the opinions, not the distractions, not the chaos. And the more often you do that, the easier it becomes to stay grounded even when everything around you is spinning. When you focus on yourself not in a selfish way, but in a self-respecting way, you reclaim authority over your inner world. You stop being pulled by every wave of negativity. You stop needing validation from people who don't understand your path. And that silence, the one people often mistake for weakness or distance, is actually power. It's the space where transformation happens. Quiet attention on your growth creates a ripple effect that changes your entire reality. There's something most people overlook when it comes to healing, especially emotional healing. And it's so simple that it almost seems too easy to matter. But it matters more than you think. It's silence. Not just the kind of silence that happens when no one is talking, but the kind that you intentionally create, the kind where you step away from noise, from input, from commentary, and allow your nervous system to reset. In a world that rewards constant output, constant reaction, and constant expression, silence feels unfamiliar. Unnatural, even, but biologically, silence is not just a break from noise. It's a state where your body and brain recalibrate. When you're in silence, you're not doing nothing. You're creating the conditions for deep internal processing. You're giving your system room to breathe, to integrate, and to let go. Most people are emotionally exhausted, not just because of what's happening in their lives, but because they never get a break from processing it. From the moment they wake up, they're bombarded notifications, conversations, emails, commentary, opinions, arguments. Even when they're not directly in conflict, their brain is absorbing all of it, and all of that information has to be filtered, sorted, weighed. That load doesn't go away when the day ends. It stays in your system, building tension, cluttering your mental space, and making it harder to actually feel what you feel. Silence is the reset button. It's the moment where your brain shifts gears. There's real data on this. When you enter periods of intentional silence, even just a few minutes, it activates the brain's default mode network. This is the same network that lights up during deep reflection, memory consolidation, and creative problem solving. In silence, your brain starts to organize thoughts, integrate emotional experiences, and resolve inner conflicts. That's why breakthroughs so often happen in stillness, not in the middle of the chaos, but in the quiet moments when your system finally gets the space to process. But here's where it gets even more important, especially if you're trying to overcome negative emotions. Negative emotions aren't just a matter of mood. They live in the body. They create tension, shallow breathing, physical stress. And when you're constantly stimulated, talking, scrolling, reacting, you don't give your body the chance to complete those stress responses. Silence is where those loops start to close. It's where the stress that got triggered can start to settle. Your breath deepens, your muscles loosen, your mind slows down enough to stop spinning and start sensing. And that's where healing begins. One of the most effective practices for managing negative feelings is learning how to be still. Not forever, not every day for hours, but regularly, intentionally. You don't need a mountaintop or a meditation retreat. You just need moments. You sit, you breathe, you notice what's happening inside, not to fix it, not to judge it, but just to witness it. And in that witnessing, something shifts. Your body stops bracing, your mind stops grasping, and you remember that you're not your thoughts. You're not the emotion, you're the observer. That shift from identification to observation is everything. And it doesn't come through more input, it comes through less. That's the role silence plays. It's not passive. It's powerful. It doesn't mean you've given up. It means you've stopped scattering your energy in 100 directions and you're bringing it back to center. You're telling your system, we're safe now, we don't have to run, we don't have to react, we're allowed to be here. And when you practice that kind of silence over days, weeks, months, something else happens. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop needing to prove your worth or respond to every comment or defend every feeling, because you start to know yourself. You start to trust that your internal state doesn't need to be broadcasted for it to be valid. Silence becomes a sign of internal confidence. It becomes a signal to yourself that you're working through things, not trying to escape them. People might not understand it. They might think you're pulling away, but what you're really doing is pulling inward. You're going back to the source of your strength. You're allowing your nervous system to settle into a rhythm that is sustainable, not just survivable. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. The world will keep getting louder. The demands, the opinions, the noise. It's not going to stop. But you can stop and reset. You can choose silence, not as retreat, but as strategy. Because when you learn to sit with yourself in silence, you stop being at the mercy of every emotion that passes through you. And in that stillness, you find something most people never discover. There's something deeply powerful that happens when you stop explaining yourself to people who aren't even trying to understand you. When you redirect that energy inward, when you stop giving constant emotional commentary on your life, you reclaim something that many of us give away far too easily, your emotional sovereignty. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop outsourcing your self-worth. Because the truth is, if you're constantly focused on how others perceive you, what they think, what they might be saying behind your back, then your mind is never really your own. It's being rented out to voices that don't even live inside you. Now let's take that deeper. Negative emotions often get amplified by what we think others think about us. That's a mental loop that can eat up your entire cognitive bandwidth. It's the replay of old conversations, the rehearsing of future ones, the imaginary arguments. All of it pulls you out of your body, out of the present moment, and into a state of mental hypervigilance. And your nervous system doesn't know those conversations are imaginary. It reacts as if they're happening in real time. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets shallow, your brain shifts into a defensive mode, and now, instead of processing one layer of emotional discomfort, you're dealing with 5. 1 real, 4 imagined, and the imagined ones are often the loudest. This is why staying silent isn't about being passive. It's about protecting your inner space. Every time you speak from a place of defensiveness or fear of judgment, your energy fragments, you're leaking power in all directions. But when you stay centered, when you don't feel the need to react, defend, or explain every internal movement, you build emotional density. That kind of stillness creates clarity. You begin to feel what's actually true, not just what's emotionally loud. There's a system in your brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, that's heavily involved in emotional conflict, especially social evaluation. It's the part of the brain that lights up when you feel judged or excluded. And here's what's important. When you repeatedly focus on external perception, that area becomes more sensitive. That means you start to overread other people's responses. You overanalyze tone, silence, body language. You create stories, and your body believes them. That belief triggers the same physiological stress responses as real conflict. This creates emotional fatigue, cognitive exhaustion, and ultimately, disconnection from yourself. But when you stay quiet, when you stop rushing to correct how others see you, you give your nervous system space to recalibrate. You come out of hypervigilance, you shift out of people, pleasing and back into presence. You begin to observe your reactions without being fused to them. And this is where deep emotional transformation happens, not in the heat of explaining yourself, but in the coolness of watching what rises without judgment. This practice builds internal strength. You stop needing external validation to feel okay. You realize that your feelings, your values, your process don't need to be seen to be real. And when that shift happens, something incredible unfolds. Your brain stops chasing. It stops chasing approval. It stops chasing closure. It stops chasing applause. Instead, it begins to reorganize around a different question, not do they understand me, but do I understand myself? And that's the question that really matters. Because once you understand yourself, once you truly see what you value, what triggers you, what heals you, you stop being pulled around by every opinion, every look, every silence from the outside. You anchor in, you become the calm in the storm instead of the person always looking for the storm to pass. Now, this isn't easy. It takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes the courage to sit with the discomfort of not being seen, not being affirmed, and still knowing your worth. But every time you stay quiet when you could have defended yourself, every time you sit with the discomfort instead of performing for approval, you build trust in yourself. You teach your brain that it's safe to not be understood, that it's safe to feel uncomfortable, and that right there rewires your emotional system. Because now, your safety isn't coming from being liked. It's coming from being aligned. This is the power of internal focus and intentional silence. When you stop trying to be understood and start trying to understand yourself, you exit the loop of emotional dependency. You no longer need to control how you're perceived because you're deeply connected to who you are. That connection, that inner relationship, is what stabilizes you when everything else is uncertain. So let go of the need to explain, let go of the need to be seen, and watch what happens when you finally decide to see yourself. One of the most overlooked but essential shifts you can make in your journey toward mental and emotional strength is learning to move from reaction to observation. This might sound subtle, but it's transformative. When something hits you, emotionally, mentally, even physically, your default setting might be to react. Someone says something disrespectful, and you feel the urge to snap back. A plan doesn't go your way, and frustration takes over. An uncomfortable feeling rises, and you try to numb it, escape it, bury it. That's reaction. It's immediate, automatic, and often unconscious. And when you live in that mode for too long, you're not in charge. Your nervous system is. Let's zoom into that for a moment. Your body is constantly receiving signals from your environment: sound, sight, temperature, facial expressions, posture. Your brain processes all of it through a filter of past experience. That means your reaction to what's happening isn't just about now. It's layered with memories, fears, old wounds, and beliefs that have been stored for years. This is why two people can experience the exact same event and respond completely differently. One stays calm. The other spirals. The difference isn't in the event. It's in the nervous system's interpretation of the event. So if you want to change your emotional life, you start by changing the way your nervous system interprets. And the first step to doing that isn't forcing yourself to feel differently. It's observing. It's noticing the gap between stimulus and response. That moment, that pause, it's tiny, but it's the doorway to control. Because once you're in that gap, you're no longer a puppet of your reaction. You're conscious, and consciousness gives you choice. Now, here's what's fascinating. Observation and reaction can't operate in the same moment. The brain has a limited processing capacity. When you shift your focus to observing what's happening, your breath, your heart rate, your thoughts, you deactivate the brain areas responsible for impulsive response. The limbic system, which governs fear and anger, starts to quiet down. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, becomes more engaged. You're literally switching networks in your brain. You're not just calming yourself down. You're changing which parts of your brain are running the show. But this takes practice, because observation doesn't come naturally when we're emotionally triggered. What does come naturally is reaction, snapping, retreating, overthinking, catastrophizing. That's the well-worn path. What you're doing by observing is building a new path. You're creating a new default response. And every time you choose to observe instead of react, you lay another brick on that path. Over time, it becomes stronger, faster, more automatic, and now your default becomes groundedness, not chaos. This is why silence is such a powerful ally in this process. When you commit to staying silent not just outwardly, but inwardly, you create the space necessary for observation to happen. You give yourself the chance to witness the emotion before it becomes action, and that witnessing is where the real transformation happens. You start to see that the emotion itself isn't the problem. It's your attachment to the story behind it. You feel anger rise, but instead of becoming the anger, you notice it. There it is. That awareness is not weak, it's command. It's leadership of the self. What you'll also notice as you do this more often is that emotions move. They don't stay still. They're energy, and energy moves when it's allowed to move. But most people never give it the space. They try to suppress, escape, or control it through reaction, and that only makes it louder. But when you sit with it, when you breathe, when you observe, when you let the feeling rise and fall without commentary, it passes. It dissolves, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always more easily than if you fight it. And over time, you begin to trust this process. You stop fearing your feelings. You stop trying to control every situation. You stop taking everything personally. Because you're not in reactive mode anymore, you're grounded, you're watching, you're choosing, and that shift changes your entire life. You'll notice it in your relationships, in your ability to handle stress, in your capacity to stay calm when others can't. You become the one who doesn't get pulled into the chaos not because you're cold, but because you're clear. And that clarity comes from repetition. Every time you feel triggered and choose observation, you're teaching your nervous system that you are safe, that you are capable, that you are in control. And that training, repeated again and again, becomes your new emotional baseline. You can't control the world. You can't control how people act, but you can train your response, and when you do that, you're no longer reacting to life, you're creating it. One of the most misunderstood aspects of emotional growth is the idea that we need to constantly express or process our emotions externally in order to heal. That we need to talk it out, write it out, or release it in some visible way for it to count. But that's not always true. Sometimes the most powerful growth happens in silence when we quietly feel the full weight of an emotion without rushing to label it, share it, or solve it. That kind of internal processing creates a deep, stable foundation. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it's real. When you focus on yourself and choose to stay silent, you're creating an environment where emotional information can settle instead of scatter. Think of your inner world like a glass of muddy water that's been shaken. Everything's cloudy at first. But if you stop shaking it, if you just let it be still, the dirt starts to settle and the water clears. That stillness is what your mind and body need to truly understand what's going on inside. Without that pause, that moment of holding space, all you're doing is swirling the same thoughts and emotions around without resolution. This internal processing isn't passive, it's active work. It requires awareness, discipline, and an ability to sit with discomfort. It's the discipline of not numbing, not blaming, not reacting. Instead, it's the decision to listen to your body, your breath, your tension patterns. Your system is always communicating with you. Your chest tightens when something's off. Your stomach drops when you're out of alignment. Your jaw clenches when you're holding back something unspoken. But these signals are subtle, and if your life is full of noise external and internal, you won't hear them. That's why silence is so necessary, not for isolation, but for integration. What most people do when negative feelings rise is either try to escape them or get validation for them. And that works for a moment. Someone reassures you, or you distract yourself, and the discomfort fades. But it doesn't dissolve, it waits. It waits for the next trigger, the next moment of stillness when it can rise again. Because it's not finished. Emotions aren't resolved through attention alone. They're resolved through digestion. Your nervous system needs to break them down, process them, and integrate them into your larger story. That digestion takes time and space. It requires you to stay with the feeling long enough to understand what it's teaching you, not just what it's saying in the moment, but what pattern it's pointing to. This is where solitude becomes sacred, not loneliness, but chosen solitude. It's in these quiet, solo moments that your brain shifts into reflection mode. The emotional centers of your brain quiet down, and the parts responsible for meaning, making light up. You're no longer trapped inside the experience. You're zooming out, seeing the pattern, recognizing the trigger, identifying the lesson. You start to notice how often your reactions aren't really about now. They're echoes of something older, something deeper. And with that awareness comes power. Now you're not just reacting, you're growing. But that growth requires that you stop seeking constant stimulation. You can't truly reflect if you're always chasing distraction, the scroll, the background noise, the endless to-do list. All of that keeps your brain in reactive mode. Silence interrupts that. It slows everything down so that what's important can rise to the surface. It teaches your nervous system that it's okay to be with discomfort without solving it right away, and that single shift changes everything. You begin to trust yourself again. You stop needing others to validate your pain because you know how to hold it yourself. You stop panicking when hard emotions show up because you've built the capacity to sit with them, observe them, and learn from them. And when that happens, your emotional baseline changes. You're no longer living in fear of your inner world. You've explored it, you've cleaned it out, you've reclaimed it, and what's beautiful is this: when you build that kind of internal strength, you don't have to say anything to prove it. People feel it, they sense the steadiness, the depth, the groundedness. They notice that you're not easily rattled, that you don't need the spotlight, that your peace isn't performative. And that kind of presence is magnetic, not because it demands attention, but because it radiates something very few people have: true emotional control born from silent, personal work. So when you choose to go quiet, when you turn inward, when you stop needing to be understood and instead focus on understanding yourself, you begin to cultivate a version of you that doesn't just survive emotional storms. You walk through them and come out clearer, stronger, unshakable.